Hello and welcome to The Linc. I'm Jarrad Johnson, and it gives me absolutely great pleasure to welcome the journalist, author and Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens to the University of Lincoln. So Peter, it's really great to have you here and great to chat to you as well. Is it your first time here at the university, and have you been to Lincoln before?
At the university, I've been to Lincoln many times. It's one of my favourite places in England because it contains one of the most wonderful buildings in the world, which most people never come to see. They go to see the Taj Mahal and they won't bother to go to Lincoln Cathedral. They're making a big mistake.
Well, Bridget Kendall was here last week giving a speech, and she said that the cathedral was one of the best in the country.
It's astonishing. It was once said you could see most of the cathedrals in England in a couple of hours. You couldn't see Lincoln in a day. It has so much fascinating detail in it. It's the most tremendous building. Fortunately, though, it hasn't been swamped by tourism, which is a blessing. York, where I was at university, was when I first went. Well, when I first went there was virtually no tourism, and it was just a lovely English town with a wonderful cathedral in it. And now, of course, it's swamped by tourism, which of course takes away a lot of what the tourists come to see.
Now let's move on.
Don't let it happen here.
I was going to say, let's move on to you, because you're the important one here. Both yourself and your brother Christopher were very talented writers and articulate orators as well. And subsequently both very successful careers. Why do you think that was? Is it genetics, or was it your upbringing? Or?
Well, it has to be a mixture of the two, doesn't it? But I think these are mysteries that you can never really penetrate. Some people are, some people aren't. But any talent that you might have, and I use the word talent in all modesty, because talent is something that you are given that you didn't create yourself, does still have to be nurtured by experience and luck. So I suppose luck had a lot to do with it. I have been very lucky in my working life.
I like it.
Lucky in editors, lucky in getting good chances, lucky in being in the right place at the right time. And it is a thing I bless all the time.
On that point, I like a quote that you brought up on the BBC Daily Politics on Friday when you were on the show, when you said, when you find a turtle on top of a fence post, you know it didn't get there by accident. So how did you get into journalism?
Not by accident. When I was a Trotskyist, I believed that it was my duty to penetrate the citadels of Fleet Street so that I could infiltrate British journalism and use what influence I had to pursue the revolutionary cause. As you see, it didn't quite work out like that.
So it was for your own kind of political purpose as an aim?
Well, yes, really. I could see from fairly early on that it was something I wanted to do. I wanted, for much of my childhood, my father was a naval officer, I wanted to be the captain of a destroyer. But I discovered quite early on that I didn't have the necessary eyesight qualifications for that, so I had to put it to one side. So what else was nearly as exciting as being the captain of a destroyer? And journalism qualified.
And how did you...
it has actually turned out to be in some ways more exciting than being captain of a destroyer.
How did you go about it, though? Did you do a journalism degree?
No, there were no such things, really. I don't think I did. I did a degree in politics, which was actually mostly a degree in Marxism and Leninism, because they let me get away with it, and that's what I did. I was an active revolutionary socialist. I did a lot of polemical writing while I was doing that. Some of it for the newspaper of the sect I then belonged to. A lot of it just ephemeral leaflets, which are now, alas, all lost. I had a collection of them once, but they vanished during a move. And you also learnt a certain amount of public speaking there. And then when the moment came to go out into the world of work, in those days, there were jobs. I applied for a trainee scheme on what was then the Westminster Press, which owned a lot of local evening and weekly newspapers. And I remember being interviewed by the editor of the Yorkshire Evening Press, which belonged to Westminster Press, and he said to me, "Which newspapers do you read?" And I said, "All of them." And he said, "Oh, thank heaven for that. Everyone else who comes in here says they only read The Guardian." And I think that's what got me the job.
So did you want to be you said you wanted to be a naval officer. When was the point that you thought journalism was for me, or politics was? Well,
I went to an optician who said that my eyesight wasn't good enough to be a naval officer, so I abandoned that. I suppose it must have been about 7 when I gave that up. So after that, it was journalism.
And you were set on that for life, really?
Well, as it turned out, I was, yes. I suppose if things had gone differently, I might have ended up doing all kinds of things, but I've managed to carry on persuading people that I can do journalism for so long now that it's probably a bit late to change.
Your style is somewhat pessimistic in terms of outlook. We were having a chat before, but you come up with some really original views that no other journalists or commentators seem to have.
Maybe other people don't think they're very sensible views, I don't know.
But do you genuinely have those views, or is this kind of, do you try to be different as often as you can?
I do not try to be different. I hate the term contrarian. I think it's ridiculous to adopt views for effect. What I say because I believe it, and for no other reason. If I didn't believe it, I wouldn't say it. And I think it would be quite wrong to go around making up or exaggerating opinions for a sort of show business effect.
So it's not brand building or anything like that?
No, I wouldn't do that. I mean, you're conscious of the fact that you've become a sort of brand, especially the Hitchens brand, which has two different sides to it because there are two of us. And that such a thing does exist, and your sense of humour forces you to admit that it does. But no, if you started trying to please people, then I think you would lose. I would lose if I started trying to please people. Let's put it in the first person, singular. I would lose my whole purpose.
And you've said you're only allowed on television when you're balanced out by at least 3 other people. Why do you think that is?
Well, I was trying to explain to people that there's this constant moaning by people who say, well, you complain about the BBC being biased against you, but you're always on it. Well, I dispute always. Their definition of always is different from mine. Of course, I do get on. But the conditions under which somebody such as me gets on are as I describe. That I don't decide the subject under discussion. The presenter is in charge. I'm always, as it were, balanced by at least 3 people who disagree with me, one of whom is, on some occasions, the presenter. And I can be cut off at any minute, and I very seldom get the last word. I've got better at getting the last word because I can see when the moment is coming when I'm going to need to grab it. But generally, those things are the real advantages which which give people real power in broadcasting, and people like me are invited on as a fig leaf to make the broadcaster look as if he is seeking to be balanced, when in fact what he's doing is seeking to appear to be balanced.
Are you singled out in that respect, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I relish the opportunity. I'd rather they had me on than they didn't. It's honourable that they do still feel the desire to have me on, and I think there are undoubtedly people in the BBC who genuinely believe that it does have a duty to be impartial, and it's because they exist that I get on at all. But it's only under restricted conditions, and it's very different from the conditions under which people who are in the mainstream will get on.
Now, you're a columnist, which is different to a normal journalist.
Very different.
Because you're paid to give your opinions,
yes.
Whereas most are paid to report impartially or just talk about the facts.
Well,
is that
what
what
you
you
report? I mean, to report impartially is something else entirely.
Do you enjoy the side of journalism that columnism gives you?
It's what I always wanted to do.
Yeah.
From pretty much from the start, it was what I always wanted to do. But I knew that you had to earn it, and it took me many, many, many years of doing other things, of hard news reporting, of specialist reporting, of being a foreign correspondent, before I felt qualified to do it, and before other people were willing to let me do it.
So how do you make that jump? Do you have to prove to people that you can do it? And is there any way back as well?
I'm not sure. I mean, I could still write you a news story if you asked me to. Because it had my name on it, people would say, well, hang on a minute, this can't be proper news because it's got the name of someone whose opinions I know on it, whereas most reporters' bylines don't actually convey that to anybody. So it would probably be difficult to persuade anybody that I was reporting impartially. I don't think now, even if I did, or indeed, I myself don't believe there is such a thing as impartial reporting. I think all reporting is partial, and it's much better if people understand that that's so, and as it were, aim off for win when they read it. And that's one of the reasons why I've so very much relished the varied press which we still have in this country, where you have many different newspapers reporting on the same thing. The thing which distresses me is how often, especially in political reporting these days, the reports are virtually identical. And they shouldn't be. They should differ from each other much more than they do. But truly impartial reporting is probably impossible. I believe in what I call adversarial reporting, and indeed adversarial presentation on broadcast news and current affairs programs, where you have people who are openly avowed with particular positions, and you know that they have that position, who are doing the questioning and the presenting, and instead of people who are pretending to have no opinions, but who do actually have them.
Do you think that's a view that's shared a lot within the industry, or
no,
do you think
I find it very hard even to get people to understand what I'm talking about. I did once present a program on what was then Talk Radio, and Kelvin Mackenzie had the brilliant idea of matching me with a co-presenter in Derek Draper, who was the opposite of everything I stood for, and all the great issues of sex, drugs and rock and roll, which are the real dividing points in society. And people would come onto our program and we'd each interview them, and we'd then argue about them. And at the end of that program, on all the issues and all the people who'd been on, anybody who had been listening would get a much better idea of what the issues were and of what that person was like, because nobody was ever interviewed by a friend than on an officially impartial channel. And everybody knew that I had one position and Derek had another. It was a fantastically good way of exposing a subject properly, and I'm sorry it hasn't caught on.
And in your job, do you ever get involved in actually shaping the news? Do you call people? Do you kind of try and get exclusives, or do you just simply look at the news and then commentate on it?
Oh, I do both, but I will follow things up. If, say, there's something in the papers today that I feel is interesting, then the chances are that I will spend quite some time, first of all, trying to confirm that it's true, and secondly, find out more about it. Sometimes people will write to me with things which I regard as stories, and there are what I think of as exclusives in my column, but it's the nature of a column. People don't tend to follow it up, so there will be stories in there which don't get followed as news, which if perhaps they'd appeared as news stories differently written, might have been. But I'm always hoping that there will be something new in there that people will look at it and say, I didn't know that, which is the thing you really want people to say when they read a news story. I never knew that before.
And are you in the newsroom environment? I mean, what does a typical week for Peter Hitchens look like? Are you in a newsroom or? I'm
in the office. I have my own office, which is a great luxury, but it's just around the corner from the big room, and I go in there. I know the other staff. I know the news desk. I know a lot of the reporters and feature writers, and we talk, and I take part in as much as the office gossip as I can find, and I use it to get the atmosphere of the capital city, which of course is distilled in a newspaper office. People have been out there in all kinds of areas of interest, and they know things not necessarily things that they can print. They know things which are essential, I think, to understanding what's really going on in the world. I love offices. I very much believe in being in the office 5 days a week.
So it's not a lonely job then, being a columnist?
Well, it can be. A lot of columnists, I have to say, never go into the office at all. But I learnt when I was a foreign correspondent that for me, that was a bad thing. You were never fully at home. You were never fully in the office. You were much too close to the refrigerator, and you were cut off from an awful lot.
What was in the refrigerator though? That's
food. You were cut off from all that gossip, and you were working on your own. And it's a challenge, and it's good for you to be on your own sometimes. But on the other hand, you needed to know what was going on at home to know how to translate what was going on in Moscow properly, because you needed to know what people's concerns were in England, in Derby or Scarborough or London or Edinburgh, to know what would interest them about Moscow. And if you lost touch with that, then you would lose touch with your readers, and you would therefore not be doing your job. So it was always important to stay in touch. And I did feel that when the only thing that connected me with the office was an occasional telephone line or a computer, that it wasn't enough. And I thought when I had the chance to decide whether I was going to be doing a column from home or whether I could be in the office and do other things, that I would do the second. I do a lot of blogging as well, which involves an awful lot of live research and keeping in touch with things, and also interchange with readers.
And at what point in the week do you decide, yes, that's what I'm going to write about? Is it often last minute?
I will start making a list on Monday, and sometimes on the Sunday, immediately after the previous column's been published. And I will keep feeding things into that list, but the decision is usually taken on Friday, and if anything comes up on Friday night, then I will change the whole thing and do it again, which is not convenient because it's in the nature of Sunday newspapers that the live news and sports pages are the ones they want to concentrate on Saturday. But if something big comes up and I want to change it, they will accommodate that. And I've rewritten the column right up to 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon sometimes. And I think that's something, again, being in the office helps you do.
And have you got a list of columns that you've written at home then that have never seen the light of day? Or
Well, there are lots of items which fall off. You can never get it all in. 1,100 words, which is pretty much my maximum, means that I'm always chucking stuff away. Yeah. Sometimes I have to chuck whole big items away because something else comes in, which I was very fond of. But by the time next week comes around, it's over. It doesn't last.
You're at the Sunday Mail now.
You mustn't call it that.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Mail
no,
on Sunday.
The Sunday Mail is a fine Scottish newspaper, but it's not the Mail on Sunday.
Mail on Sunday.
It's okay. I mean, I have to say that.
Was it difficult to leave the Daily Express though?
It wasn't at all difficult to leave the Daily Express when it happened.
You're kind of forced.
No, I was very glad to go because it had been, first of all, it had been in a long decline. Secondly, although it was very entertaining and enjoyable in a way to be working against the general tide of things when Rosie Boycott was editor and it turned into a New Labour paper. I had a feeling that it was heading towards quite a serious decline, and I think since then that's what's happened to it. And when Richard Desmond took it over, and it really was a bit of a matter of conscience for me to continue to work for a man who owned what I regard as pornography channels on television. When the Mail on Sunday came along and offered me a job, it was a huge relief because I couldn't have stayed. It would have been ridiculous to have my political and moral positions and to be working for someone who did that. So in the end, after 24 years, it was very sad, and it was sad to see the paper go into the decline it had been. When I joined the Daily Express, it was a broadsheet newspaper with a daily sale of, I think, 2.2 million. And you walk through the office and Osbert Lancaster and Chapman Pincher and all kinds of big names are walking around, and it was a big, serious, important newspaper. And by the time I left it, I don't think you could really have said that about it anymore. A lot of good people continue to work for it and do continue to work as hard for it as they can, but it simply isn't the paper that it was.
And moving on to your politics, you've been a member of both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. I think you had 6 years as a member of each party.
No, I don't think I could have stuck the Conservative Party for that long. I joined the Conservative Party when the Blair government was elected because I thought there ought to be a constitutional resistance to Blairism, but I very rapidly found there was nothing there. And I went through it quite quickly because there wasn't anything to do, and there wasn't any real point to it. And I did once get hold of a copy of the Constitution of the Conservative Party, which is a very hard thing to find, and discovered by careful reading that there is no way in which a member of the Conservative Party can influence its policy at all. None.
And that's ingrained.
So why bother? And also the Hague period and what followed was so demoralising to watch the party more or less adapt itself.
That's when Hague, Duncan Smith and
William Hague began by trying to offer some sort of opposition to Blairism, but when he was destroyed to some extent by the media, let's remember the picture of him as a dead parrot in the sun, realising that he was that people who probably ought to be on his side were not going to be, and his ultimate removal and failure and what followed. It was watching the Conservative Party gradually adapt to the New Labour era and become New Labour,
and
which is what it has now done. I don't claim to have been fully aware of that at the time, but that was what drove me out. If it was 6 years, it didn't feel like it.
But you've described the Conservative, or the modern day Conservative Party as they should be called the Socialist Workers' Party.
Well, you can call them anything. You can call them the Socialist Workers' Party, you can call them the Communist Party of Great Britain, you could call them New Labour. What you cannot call them is the Conservative Party. I mean, the problem with the Conservative Party is it actually pursues ideas in politics, many of which I pursued when I was a Trotskyist student in the 1970s. The difference being that when I was a Trotskyist student, I knew I was a Trotskyist student and I understood the origins of the ideas I was pursuing. These people think that they are responsible, well maybe they don't, they think they are responsible conservative politicians when they are in fact pursuing the agenda of Euro-communists and Gramscians. And they don't know. Maynard Keynes said that any politician who said he had no philosophy was invariably the slave of some defunct economist. And these people are the slaves of defunct revolutionary philosophers, but they don't even understand what it is they're doing.
And you've been a member, as I say, of both Labour and Conservatives, and you've got a bit of a history of kind of changing your opinion to the polar opposite. You used to be a trot.
Polar opposite? It's nothing to do with polar opposite. I have many views. I, for instance, have been a member of the National Union of Journalists consistently since 1973 and believe very much that trade unions are a necessary part of a civilized society. How could I not? After what Lech Wałęsa and Solidarity did in Poland, they're a hugely important part of a civil society and can, on some occasions, be a very important resistance to an overmighty state. I am very much in favour of a welfare state. I am, in many ways, still a social democrat in terms of the sort of domestic policies I would pursue. My foreign policy is different, but it isn't a matter of polar opposite at all. The position I have now is, as far as I can make it, a consistently sustainable position based on an awful lot of experience and drawing from a lot of different traditions. I cannot see why one cannot be simultaneously socially and morally conservative and in favour of making sure that there is a net through which nobody can fall in society and being fundamentally generous to those who fail.
Peter, I'm very conscious of time, so if I can rattle
Don't worry
through
about that on
some,
my account. I mean, I think
I know
we have
you've got a
minute or two.
speech to do on
Yeah,
Putin and Russia, but if I could rattle through some
What have you got?
quick-fire questions, if that's okay. What's your favourite, or who is your favourite political commentator in the UK, apart from yourself, of course?
Political commentator. I quite like Simon Jenkins as, I think, a very good columnist. He's totally wrong on drugs, but generally he's extremely illuminating. Mary Dejevsky, who was a Moscow correspondent when I was there at St. Ives, it seems to me also to be developing one of the most powerful and original and thoughtful voices in the British press. So there's a couple that I would come up with instantly. And
who's your current favourite modern-day politician?
I don't have favourite politicians.
None at all?
I just don't have them, no.
And finally, you've worked in Washington before as a correspondent. Do you think Donald Trump will become President of the United States?
Do you know what I learned in Washington that I really wasn't interested in American politics? As soon as I realized I wasn't, I just got on the plane or on the train and lighted out as far as I could get from Washington, D.C. and went to find out what was going on in America. And to this day, I find American politics baffling and actually rather tedious. So forgive me, I'll stay away from Donald Trump.
Well, there we have it. That's all we've got time for with this particular interview. I'd love to spend so much time talking to Peter.
It's a pity about that, isn't
it? We've got to let him go and get ready for his speech. Unfortunately, he's talking about Vladimir Putin and Russia. Don't forget, there's plenty more to read about and see on our website, thelinc.co.uk. You can also follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @thelinc, or indeed head over to our Facebook page at facebook.com/thelinc to keep up to date with the news around campus and in the great city of Lincoln. Peter, thank you very much for talking to me, and it's been great to see you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.